Welcome. This is the Mentally Whole podcast. I am your host, Lauren Green. This podcast is a safe place for us to have weekly discussions about mental health, Christ, personal development, and the tools to live our best lives. Stay tuned for a new episode. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Mentally Whole podcast. I am your host, Lauren Murray, and I hope you guys are doing well. So, if you're new to the show or are a seasoned vet, don't forget to subscribe, share, and rate the podcast, because when you do that, that shows me that you guys are supporting the podcast and you guys are enjoying the content that I am giving out. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the email list, because I have a few exciting things coming up and I really want you guys to be a part of it. So please, subscribe to my email list. The link will be in the show notes. All right. So let's get into today's topic. Now, I wasn't going to discuss this this early on in our month of talking about fear, but I decided to do it today. So yesterday I was batch recording, and for whatever reason, I wasn't as productive as I should be, as I hoped to be, and it just wasn't a good batch recording day for me. I don't know if it was the topic that I was doing. I don't know if it's because I was just in my head too much, but it just wasn't a good batch recording day for me. But today we are going to talk about the fear of failure. So recently I did a poll on my Instagram page. If you don't follow me already, you should probably follow me, because I talk about cool stuff on there. And I did a poll of what was everyone's biggest fear, and the top 3 were fear of failure, fear of success, and fear of the unknown. So I'm going to talk about one of those today, because I think it's really important. And I really enjoyed that feedback from you guys. And I don't know if everybody listened to my show who did the poll. I don't know if everybody listened to my show who did the poll, but I really enjoyed that feedback from you guys. 'Cause I literally wrote this episode in a few hours, I think, after I realized that you guys need help with the fear of failure and the fear of the unknown. So today we're talking about the fear of failure. So in our first episode that kind of started off this series of talking about fear, I did not define what fear is. So let me do that for you guys. So the first definition of fear that I found is that fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous and is likely to cause pain or threat. Fear also means an unpleasant feeling triggered by the perception of danger, real or imagined. So fear can sometimes be based off of perception that something is dangerous, that we perceive something to be dangerous, and that could be real or imagined. And we can probably get deeper into like how we perceive things, probably like in another episode, because that kind of gets into like brain anatomy, and I don't want this episode to be that long. So the fear of failure can really prevent us from achieving all of the things that we want to achieve. It can be so strong that it prevents us from starting and completing things that we really want to do. Like, if you want to start that business and you feel like the business is going to fail, you might not start it, or you might take a few steps and then stop. But the fear of failure can really grip a person into like stagnation, because you're so caught up in failing that you just don't do it. So you're probably wondering, what are some causes of the fear of failure? So one cause of the fear of failure is critical or unsupportive parents, right? You might have had parents who were super critical, super like, hey, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and they just weren't supportive of your endeavors. That could also cause you to have the fear of failure. Another cause of the fear of failure are traumatic experiences. So when I think of this, I think of a person who like tried to do something for the first time, like singing or dancing or giving a speech, and people just laughed at them, right? People just started laughing, or someone said after the fact that you didn't do well or something like that, as traumatic. Or you were going to do a speech and you had a full-blown panic attack, or just anything, like anything traumatic could have caused you to have, not everything traumatic, let me take that back. Not everything traumatic could cause you to have the fear of failure, but something traumatic related to the thing that you're afraid to do could cause you to have the fear of failure. Another cause of the fear of failure is you don't want to be embarrassed, or you might feel ashamed about certain things. But I think being embarrassed plays a big part in the fear of failure. You don't want to feel disappointed if something doesn't go your way. So let's get into how the fear of failure shows up. So one of the ways, I think the most common way that the fear of failure shows up is the reluctance to try new things or get involved. So you might be hesitant to try new things. You might be hesitant to do certain stuff because you think you're going to fail at it, or you just might think you're not good at it. So for example, I have been doing reels, but I was kind of hesitant to do reels because one, I didn't know how to do them, and two, I'm like, this isn't going to work. I mean, it's new to Instagram, but it's like, is this really going to be beneficial to me? This might not even help me. This might hinder me. Or, to me, failing could be like not getting as many views. So for my first few reels, I was getting views, but it wasn't as what I expected it to be. And that's another thing to note about the fear of failure, is that failing and failure is subjective. So what I think is a failure, you might not think is a failure. And I think that's important to note as we get deeper into this episode, is that you have to realize what failing means to you. Like, what does failing mean to you? What does that look like when you fail? Right? So I was pretty reluctant to start reels because I'm like, this might not work out. Like, this might not help, get the brand out there. This might not help the podcast get out there. And for the first few ones, I was getting views, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so, I was kind of reluctant to begin with, and I didn't know how to do them, or didn't know how to edit the videos either. So I was a little reluctant in that. And so also another interesting thing about the fear of failure is that the fear of failure could also be seen in perfectionism. And so what I learned in researching this is that the fear of failure and the fear of success are very similar. And they both have their ties to perfectionism. And when a person struggles with perfectionism, there's a fear somewhere there. But I thought that was interesting when I Googled it, that the fear of failure is connected to perfectionism. And you see that when a person has to have everything, every little detail has to be perfect before they launch. Every little detail has to be in order. Everything has to be in alignment with what they want to do. And sometimes that perfectionism can prevent you from fully starting. Because if you want every little thing, every little minor detail, every big detail to be perfect, sometimes you could call that stalling. Like, you're stalling on what you want to do because you want every little single thing to be perfect, everything to be good, everything to be ideal. And that could be seen as another way of fully getting out of what you need to do, because you want every little thing to be right. Another way that fear of failure shows up is in self-sabotage. You might procrastinate, right? Because you're so afraid of failing that you might procrastinate. You might wait forever to do something. You might wait till the day before the deadline to submit that application, the day before the deadline to make that video or whatever, because you think you're going to fail, and so you wait to the last minute to do it. And that's not good either. Also, another way that fear of failure shows up, this is also included under the self-sabotage umbrella, is that you do try some things, but you don't give it your best, right? You try it and do it, but it's like, I only gave 10% when I could have gave 80%, right? You don't even try your best. And the last way that the fear of failure shows up is in low self-esteem or just a lack of confidence, right? You have this idea that you're not good enough. And so, since you're not good enough, it's not going to work out. Or I'm not smart enough, and so this isn't going to work out. Or I'm going to fail at this because I'm not smart enough. Or I'm going to fail at this because I don't have the skills for this. And sometimes the crazy thing about fear is that sometimes when we boost our confidence in certain areas of our lives, sometimes that fear just goes away. Like, for example, I don't know why I never had the idea to start a YouTube channel, but it was probably because of fear, and fear that it probably wasn't going to turn out right. And probably it was a fear of failure because, I'm like, I'm not that good on camera. This isn't going to go well. But now, since I've been doing the podcast for a while and things like that, and doing Instagram lives and interviews, I feel more comfortable in front of the camera, right? I feel like sometimes confidence and boosting your confidence and self-esteem in certain areas can help you deal with certain fears. So, what are some tips to overcome the fear of failure? So the first thing is you have to change your perspective on failing, right? Even though you failed, what did I learn from this experience? Even though this didn't go well, what did I learn from this? Right? I think we have to change our perspective on failing. I know this has helped me tremendously. Like, for example, I don't think I ever told this story on the podcast, but when I was learning how to drive, I was 16, and I was around 16, 17 when I started taking the license, like the actual driver's license test when you have to drive with somebody in the car. I took that test 4 times before I passed it. So I failed that test 3 times before I passed it. And every time I didn't really think about failing. Well, I kind of did have the fear of failing because I had to pay, money again to take the test again. But one of the things I remember that I did that helped me was like, okay, well, what did I do wrong this time? Like, I was making very small mistakes throughout the time. Every time I took the test, I made a small mistake. Like the first time I didn't stop at the stop sign. No, the first time I didn't parallel park right. The second time I didn't stop at the stop sign. And then one time, like, I didn't use my blinker or something that I didn't do. And I was making really small mistakes. So every time after I failed, I would go back and say, hey, okay, what did I do wrong? And how can I change that for the next time? And really saying like, hey, once I finish this license, get this license, I don't have to take this test no more. That was also encouraging. Like, okay, I done took this 3 times. I should know how to drive by now. Okay. So yeah, change your perspective on failing, and, just change your perspective, change it. Start calling your failures lessons learned. Like, hey, that was a lesson learned, and I learned something from it, and move on and apply that to your life. And the last tip that I have for you guys is look at the worst case scenario. So this was something This is something that I realized that on This Is Us, Randall does this a lot. He always does this on the show. He's like, okay, what's the worst case scenario that could happen? And I think that's important because sometimes we think that the worst case scenario is like a natural disaster or something, and it's like, that's not the case, sis. Or something just really like outlandish. And I think that we have to look at the worst case scenario and really like break that down. Like, sometimes the worst case scenario is a no, right? Sometimes the worst case scenario is hearing a no. The worst they can do is say no. And I think when you look at the worst case scenario, it's easier to manage your emotions. So for example, I was talking to somebody and I was like, oh, I really want to like ask them to do something with me, but I didn't do it because I'm like, they're gonna say no anyway. They don't know me like that. And then my cousin said, well, what's the worst that can happen? All they can say is no, right? And I've heard no before in different situations, so why is that so hard now, right? So look at the worst case scenario and, figure out what's the worst that could happen, right? What's the worst that could happen? So I hope this episode blessed you. It blessed me. We talked about the fear of failure. I don't know what next week's topic is going to be, but I hope you guys enjoyed this and stay blessed and have a great week. Bye, guys.